What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Chop and Brew. I am Chip Walton. Welcome to part 3, episode 3 of our B-Jam series. What's B-Jam? Better Judge a Mead, an interview series guest hosted by National Meadmaker of the Year, Josh Holbrook, talking all things mead judging for the month of August. In this episode, we have 2 mead makers of the year going head to head. Man, this is some black hole forming, new sun being born going on up in here, and they're going to get deep into mead. Josh is talking to the one and only Steve Fletty. Y'all know Fletty. Fletty is a great friend of the show. He's been on the show a few times, sampling his wonderful meads and collaborating with us on both the smoked mead, which this is one of the last bottles of, and it is tasting amazing. The smoke character's fallen out, and now it's just kind of like this smooth honey. I'm not even going to get into it. Maybe I'll do a separate video. That's not what you're here for. I just want to point out smoked mead, and Fletty also did the lilac mead. Fletty's a 2-time AHA Meadmaker of the Year and Mazer Cup winner. More importantly, he's a national level BJCP judge and mead judge. And possibly most important, he's a Kansas City Barbecue Society certified judge. Not applicable to the conversation today, but I thought it was worth pointing out. This dude loves to judge things within the chop and brew realm. Josh and Fletty discuss a lot of mead topics in this conversation, including what does a good score sheet look like, how to be more than just a flaw detective when judging, how to approach meads that have a long list of ingredients, why a judge needs to have experience with other alcoholic beverages besides mead for a broader perspective, how to appreciate dry meads, and what to look for when judging pyments. And then they do their taste along. Josh wanted to do a taste along for each of these interviews. So Fletty chose the Hawaiian Lehua Blossom, which is a dry sparkling mead from Heidrun Meadery. And I have never tasted it, but it sounds phenomenal from listening to their tasting notes. One quick note for all you BJCP folks out there, you can get non-judging points for watching these discussions, interacting, listing some takeaways and some questions that they brought up to you. Check out the link in the video description below and go do that. Get your points, man. Get your non-judging points. Quick look ahead. Next week's Better Judge a Mead interview is with Tom Repas. Tom is a 2-time Best of Show winner at Mazer Cup, the 2018 National Meadmaker of the Year, and this year's recipient of the AMMA Ken Schramm Award. So a really awesome conversation also coming up next week. Before we unleash the mead nerdery, I gotta point out that these episodes are brought to you with support from Imperial Yeast. Their seasonal release, Bartleby Kvike strain, available now at your local homebrew shop. And our BFFs, the Patreon party people, join them in keeping the show rolling along at patreon.com/chopandbrew.
All right, Steve, thanks for being in on this discussion. I'm interested to hear your perspective on a lot of this stuff, so I think we'll just dive in.
Okay, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, this should be a good time. The main thing I wanted to jump into right out of the gate was discussion of structure, because this is one part of me judging that I was really oblivious to for a long time. So really the last year and a half, getting to understand what structure is and what role plays in mead, I think that has been really pivotal for me for judging. So I wanted to see, let's just start off. What is structure?
Well, structure, I guess it's a wine term, basically. It's a way to talk about how the major flavor components add up or work together or play together. So you're talking about tannin, acidity, sweetness, alcohol, mouthfeel. How do those all work together? How do they play together to make a cohesive beverage?
So when you're judging structure, like what elements do you just have this list in your head that you're going through? Are you going through your list of, sweetness, acidity, tannin? Like, are you just checking off that list and gauging them, or is it a little less analytical when you're going through judging a mead?
I think for me, it's much less analytical than that. My first approach is, okay, what's my impression? What's jumping out at me? And then, is it multidimensional or is it one-dimensional? Is everything working together, or is something really sticking out? And how does that stick out in relation to everything else? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So how does structure play into balance?
I think if you have good structure, you should have good balance.
Okay.
If tannin and acidity and alcohol, mouthfeel, if they're all working together, then that creates balance.
So when something has an issue with structure, usually do you find it's one element of structure, or is it a combination of things?
Oh boy, most often I think it's one element, but it could be a combination of things. Most often the big flaw is just, one dimensional. It's this one thing. It's too sweet. It might be a clean fermentation, but it's all just sweet, and there's no acidity, there's no tannin, there's no other element to round it out and make it drinkable. You taste it and go, okay, well, yeah, it's got great raspberry, say, but it doesn't have anything else to balance it out. Or maybe it's too boozy, or maybe it's too acidic. Another huge one is acidity. People over acidic, when they're trying to balance whatever sweetness with acidity, they go too far, and they're just like puckering and harsh.
Is it just too easy to get to a level where it's too much sweetness and too much acidity?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely.
So when something's out of balance in structure, usually these sort of flaws will stick out to you. It's going to be harsh, flabby. Do you think structure has a big role in separating? Because it seems like a lot of times in mead judging, and I joke about this with other judges, it seems like mead judging, we're judging meads your whole flight. Oftentimes when it seems like I'm judging a mead flight, our score range might be 38 to 45, whereas judging a beer flight, it might be anywhere from 13 to 40. It's a wider range. So like, do you think structure has a lot to do with differentiating when like mead judging, when you're judging a flight of meads and there's not a lot of real problematic meads? Do you think it's structure that really helps separate out the ones that shine?
I think so, definitely, because the ones that really shine have that other element to them. I mean, we've gotten to a point where there's a lot of good, well-fermented mead, but it's just kind of boring. Maybe it's just like, okay, it's big, it's sweet, it's like got great fruit, but how much of it can you actually drink? Would you drink, a whole glass full? As a judge, you're drinking, a little bit, and you're judging on that. But I think you really need to think about overall drinkability, and that's probably where structure comes in. It doesn't have. For example, a sweet mead might be like, it might be super clean. It might have great flavor. It might have good honey expression. But when you get to the end of that, third or fourth or fifth sip, do you want more of it? Or are you just going, okay, it's just sweet. Maybe if it had some tannin, if it had some acidity, if it had another element, does it take you on a journey? Do you want to say, oh, that's really cool, now I want some more? Or is it like, okay, it's sweet, whatever?
I guess that leads into a good discussion, because when you're looking at a flight of meads, should the most complex and like intense ones always be the best? So like, how do you balance out meads that are really well balanced, but they're really simple against something that's really complex and in your face?
As a judge?
Yeah, as a judge. So, I mean, it'd be back in beer judging, it seems like this is a big reason why they've separated out a lot of the stronger stout styles from other dark beers, is because allowing things to compete on more of an even playing field. But mead styles aren't really separated by intensity. You can have like a really sweet, intense sack mead and a really subtle hydromel. So how do you see those two competing?
If you're a good judge, you should be able to do that. You should be able to say, that's a really great hydromel, and not let your expectations come into play, not let your prejudice or preferences come into play. You should be able to say, this is a really fantastic hydromel, and well, that's big, and I really like this one maybe, or it's like huge and it's a great big flavor bomb, but this one technically is better. So, but that comes with experience, and that you have to be able to leave your prejudices at the door. You have to have some experience in tasting things and know that, it might be actually, well, maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. I was going to say that it might be harder to make this hydromel. You shouldn't judge something on whether it's harder to make, but you should judge on something. Is it technically better, and not let your favorites get in the way.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really tough thing, just making sure that you're giving those more subtle styles and subtle meads a fair shake and not just getting distracted by intensity.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, something big and bold, is not necessarily better, but people often let that, I've seen it happen beer judging for sure. Whereas it comes down to best of show, and it's like, you've got like this, a Kolsch versus a Russian Imperial Stout. And I've actually seen a judge say, that one's a better beer, but I like this one more. And it's not about liking it. It's like, what's the best one?
I think an example with mead would be the judging comment of, if you have a raspberry mead, is it fair to say mead's more raspberry, or are you just asking for something more intense?
That's a great example. That's a great example of judge preference. I mean, if you're given a raspberry mead, you have to judge the mead in front of you, not the mead you expect. And I love raspberry, so more raspberry is great, but that doesn't mean it has to be all like beating you over the head with a great big giant raspberry club. It could be low raspberry, it could be subtle raspberry, with some sparkling, presented as sparkling. It doesn't have to be that great big huge giant, sweet cloying thing. And so you should be able to say, okay, it says raspberry. How does that raspberry work? How is this mead structured? Is it well structured? Does it all work together? Is it all playing well together? Is the raspberry, and how does the honey play into that? It shouldn't all just be raspberry, raspberry, raspberry.
Sure. Yeah, seeing how that raspberry plays overall in the mead, and not just, okay, I just want more, but how does it fit into the overall balance?
Right.
Sure. I've entered a lot of competitions. You've entered a lot of competitions. I want to know what your opinion is on what constitutes a good score sheet. Like, is a good score sheet just a very full score sheet? Does it have a lot of words on it? Or what do you think your job is as a judge in order to produce a good score sheet?
First of all, I think a score sheet needs to be descriptive and not prescriptive. Just judge the beverage in front of you, describe what you're tasting, smelling, seeing. And it doesn't have to be, all the space does not have to be filled up. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes there's not a lot to say. If it's just a dry mead, for example, it might be really simple. There might not be a lot there to comment on. But just because you put a lot of words on a score sheet, I've gotten those score sheets. It's like, okay, wow, there's a lot of words here, and none of these are actually helping me. This judge doesn't really know what they're talking about, for one thing. And, they're just like, they're looking for reasons to find flaws. So, trust your palate, write down what you perceive, and comment on how that works. Does it work? Or doesn't it work? Or is there some missing element? And don't tell me what to do. Just do that, and then I can figure it out. And I get, okay, someone might say, well, I'm a newbie, I might need some help. It's like, no, well, the judge, I've gotten the score sheets where the judge says, oh, you did this, that's wrong, you should do this. It's like, and they're completely not even close to being in the same state as the ballpark where that mead was made. It's like, no, you're wrong, I didn't do that. It's like, and for you to guess is not helpful. Just describe what you perceive.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective. I hear some judges argue, this person's paying a fee, like they're asking for a service. You're providing the service of making sure you're filling out a thorough score sheet. And so it seems like for a lot of judges, that just means a lot of words.
It does, and often that just isn't useful. Less is more often. If there's a lot to say, say it. If there's not a lot to say, don't just write to fill up space.
So you feel it's almost never appropriate to provide recommendations for process, like do this instead or adjust this, because you're just assuming a process that might not even be at work in this mead?
Exactly. Yeah, don't assume. I mean, you can say too acidic, or, needs tannin, or something like that about the perception or how the mead presents. But for you to tell the person how to correct it is never, I think, useful, because I've gotten those score sheets where the judges are completely wrong. They have no idea what they're talking about.
I've heard some people criticize judges that are new in the BJCP program as saying that they're just trying to check boxes, like they're just looking for flaws. And I think I've seen this on some newer judges' score sheets. You'll get a score sheet back and they're going to have like 4 or 5 different flaws checked on there that are just, okay, maybe there's something wrong with it, but they're just, even if there is a flaw, maybe they're not picking the right one and it's just their perception's off. But what's your perspective on, like, do you think the program is unfairly geared toward identifying flaws?
I don't know that it's unfairly geared to identifying flaws. I think that's how some people think and are trained to train other people. It's like, it's your job to be the detective to find out what's wrong with this beer. Well, there might be nothing wrong with the beer. And, and I think some judges think, okay, I've done all this training. I've tasted all, I'm the gatekeeper. You're not the gatekeeper as a judge. You're just there to taste what's in front of you and give me as an entrant your perceptions. And everyone has a different palate. Not everyone is, God's gift to judging. Not everyone can taste all things or smell all things. So just tell me what you perceive. And then, okay, so maybe someone's not an experienced mead maker or beer maker, whatever. But based on those perceptions, you can go to someone who is and say, well, this guy said this, or this person said this, like, how do I fix that?
Nice. How do you view the descriptive parameters? So for sweetness, carbonation, and strength, how do you view that as a judge when you get those descriptors on a mead? If you find that the mead isn't fitting into what's declared, do you think that's something that should be considered into how well this mead is judged? Or do you think this is a guideline? Like, how should a person take those parameters and use that when they're judging a mead?
For me, it's a guideline, it's a range. It's like, you shouldn't nitpick something to death for one perhaps small flaw. This mead might be wonderful, but maybe it's sweet rather than semi-sweet, or maybe it's off dry rather than semi-sweet. Are you gonna it's not the end of the world, people. How does the whole beverage work together? I think for me, that's more important. Is it a wonderful thing? Do I want to drink this? And then it's like, whether or not it's like, has this one minor thing wrong to it, to me is like, okay, it's probably, things like that only come into play when you're comparing something for metals. It's like, okay, yeah, this one's wonderful, and it's like, it's just a slightly, or whereas this one is like, how does it all work together? I think is more important than whether or not it's exactly where it should be.
Yeah, it's not that you're assessing a certain number of points deduction if you sense that parameter is off from what's declared.
Right. No, there's no, it's not a standard deduction checkbox, like, if this, then that. No, not at all.
Okay. Yeah, it just seems like another instance, kind of like the flaws, where, if you're a judge that's looking to nitpick, this is another place that you can pick. So I think I appreciate your perspective of, let's take a zoomed out view of this mead. How well does it work? How is the balance? How good is this as a whole?
It's part of that mindset where you're looking for flaws. If you're looking for flaws, you're going to find them. And that's where my perspective as a judge is different. It's like, what do I perceive? How does this beverage work? Does it work? Maybe it doesn't work. And okay, if it doesn't work, then give me your percept. Then I will record my perceptions on why it doesn't work for me and why it doesn't meet what I'm told it's supposed to be. And not just like, okay, there's got to be something wrong here. We're going to find it.
Yeah, you don't have to be that detective. So we talked about those parameters. How about when it comes to declared ingredients? What if you're tasting something that's not declared, or if they have a list of several ingredients and you're like, you know what, I don't get this, that, or the other that they declared. How does that affect how you're judging this mead?
If something is declared and it's not there, then that's a problem. Maybe you just can't taste it. Or maybe it's just too low. But as an entrant, you should taste it and say, okay, I put tart cherries, black currants, and raspberries in here. Can I taste all of those? And if you can't, don't record that. If someone tells me those things are there and I can't necessarily perceive one of them, but it's a good mead, is like, I'm willing to maybe cut them a little slack. And people also have to realize that, okay, you declared like, okay, 5 things. Not those 5 things don't necessarily all have to be equal players. One could be a minor player. It's like, for my favorite example is Rhone wine, red wine, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre. Those 3 grapes are in Rhone wines, and they're not all in equal proportion. They all have different roles to play. Some are there for tannin, some are there for acidity. It's not like it. And some judges have this mindset where it's like, I need to taste equal raspberry, equal tart cherry, equal black currant. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Like, how does it work together? Does it achieve good structure? Is it a good mead? Not, it's like, they said blueberries and whatever. It's like, and I'm not getting any blueberries. Like, well, I'm getting only the little blueberries. Like, that's not the point. Is it a good mead?
I guess I'll use one example that I've been guilty of. So I've entered a strawberry mead that had black currants that I didn't think were really obvious, and I didn't declare them, but I think it helped it be judged as more of a complex mead as a whole. So if you're a judge and you're like, you know what, I kind of feel like they used black currants in the strawberry mead, are you going to view that as a negative, that this was undeclared and it's like they're trying to sneak something by?
I don't necessarily view that as undeclared unless it's a big problem and it detracts. For example, for years I've been making this tart cherry mead, which is, well, it's actually tart cherry, black currant, and raspberries. The raspberries are there just for tannin. And I used to declare tart cherry, raspberry, black currant, and people would go, well, I'm not getting any raspberry. Like, okay, so I stopped. And I just don't declare it. So no, I don't think it's a problem.
I wonder if maybe it becomes a problem if it's something that doesn't fit in the style. If you're using something maybe outside the style, it seems like there's a lot of leeway when we're talking about, say, a berry mead. But if I'm trying to sneak like malt into my trad or something like that, that's not within the style, maybe that should be judged more harshly.
Perhaps, yeah.
Okay, that's fair. So we talked about trying to balance, how do you judge a simple mead versus a complex mead? I want to dive more into exact styles, because as we just talked about with berry meads, this is a really broad style. When you're looking at the beer guidelines, if you're looking at like a Pilsner style, this is a really exact, like precise definition of what this style is. So, but with mead styles, it seems like it's so broad. So how do we even have standards in styles that are so broad like this?
Can you give me a better example? I'm not quite sure. I wasn't quite sure what you're trying to get at with that question.
I wonder how we go about judging a category that's so broad, I guess. and like these mead styles are so broad.
Oh,
So, how is something in style or outer style, or is this just not part of the discussion when it comes to mead judging? It's more just, does it work?
I think maybe the answer to that is how well is the structure of the mead working? Does it achieve whatever those parameters are in terms of strength, carbonation, and the ingredient you listed? Is that working well? Is everything in play? Does it have great acidity? Is the sweetness balanced against the acidity? Is there some complexity, some depth, some interest, or is it just like, okay, whatever, I'm a mead, I'm kind of sweet, but I'm pretty one-dimensional, kind of boring.
Yeah, it seems like as a whole, mead styles are so much more based on balance and does it work rather than measuring up to a standard.
Oh, huh. That's okay. I see what you're saying now. Hmm. Yeah. So right. Yeah. I think you're right. It comes down to depth and complexity, and that other element. And a lot of meads I taste in competition are okay, but don't have that life to them. They don't sing, they don't pop, they don't have any, like, wow, the angels aren't singing.
Yeah, it seems like, because part of the prep work for doing these interviews with people like yourself was trying to solicit feedback from the community. What do they think the issues are with mead judging? What do they think can be improved? And it seemed like one of the big themes was just judge education and knowledge and experience. Just maybe a lot of judges aren't very experienced at judging mead in general. Do you think there's certain styles that really suffer from that inexperience? Do you think there's styles that are not really given a fair shake because judges don't have a lot of experience with them?
Yeah, I think so. Dry meads would be one of them. I don't think people know a lot about pyments. And maybe trad meads in general. I don't. I think the problem is people have I think some judges have a very narrow idea of what mead is. They've only come at it from the mead perspective, and maybe that mead perspective is based on like some guy in their homebrew club who makes mead, and suppose he makes good mead. That's what mead is. But they don't. Problem is there's not a lot of availability of good commercial meat across the country. Aren't a lot of standards, and a lot of the people in the mead world come at it maybe from a homebrew perspective initially, and they don't have a lot of experience judging or tasting anything else. So they need to get out of their comfort zone. They need to try some spirits. They need to try some cocktails. They need to drink some wine. I think having a good knowledge of wine, a good basic knowledge of wine, helps people be much better mead makers and mead judges.
I did encounter some comments in researching this that there are some people that are critical that there's a movement within the mead community or mead judging community to make mead into wine. You guys are trying to make mead something it isn't. How would you respond to that?
I would say, well, what is it then? If it's mead is more like wine than it isn't like wine. And I disagree. I've heard that comment, and people say mead is its own thing. And I'm going to, well, okay, if it's its own thing, okay, it exists in its own little space. But I taste some of those meads from those people who say mead is its own thing, and they're just like so lifeless. They're so one-dimensional. They're so cloyingly sweet. It's like, I don't want to drink cough syrup. If this is what you think mead is, like, no, I disagree. I think you're wrong. You need to just get out of your basement and try something else.
Yeah, it reminds me, because you commented on trads as maybe an area that people need more experience with judging. One of the comments about you guys are trying to make mead into wine, there was a comment about tannin and its role in a traditional mead. The idea being there's no tannin in honey. Like there's nothing in the normal ingredients of this beverage that would lend itself to tannin or like acidity. And so when you're adding these different things, it's very untraditional for a mead. So how appropriate do you think it is to have, you know, tannin, acid, other things in a traditional mead, which is meant to showcase the honey? How do you think these elements play in a traditional, and why?
I think they round it out and make it better. Years ago, I saw a presentation by Ken Schramm. I've learned a lot from Ken Schramm. Ken's a great guy, and he talked about how honey has on the order of hundreds of flavor components, where as compared to wine, grapes have thousands of flavor components. Honey is very simple. If you just take honey and ferment it, it's kind of boring. And for years and years, you know, I've made trad meads, and something, it was kind of hit and miss. And they're just really simple. You know, if you add a little oak, you add a little acid, it helps. It makes them better. If you treat them like wine, it makes them better. It gives them more depth and complexity. Sure, that's my opinion. And the people who do that, the people whose meads I've tasted, traditional meads I've tasted that make them in that fashion, they're more interesting. You know, I'm going to call out a friend of mine, Carvin Wilson. I'd never liked dry mead. I've had, up until I met Carvin, I could count on one hand the number of good dry meads I had in my life. And it was not 5, it was 3. Maybe even 2. I might be being generous, but so Carvin gives me this dry mead. It's like, wow, how do you do that? Because again, honey doesn't have a lot of flavor components. So if you ferment that out dry, it's like, there's not much there. You're going to have really good honey. You're going to have really good fermentation protocol. And you don't want it super boozy, so it's just all alcohol. But there's not much there. So if a little sweetness makes it better, but then when you add some tannin and some acidity, you know, wow, suddenly it starts to be really good, really interesting. And there's nothing wrong with that. And what is the problem? I mean, winemakers age things in barrels, beer makers age things in barrels, beer makers add hops, you know, spirit makers take spirits and put them in oak for a very good reason. And you know, what's wrong with doing that with mead? You know, from the oak, from the barrels, you're getting tannin, you know, you're getting flavors. It's just, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say if you're looking at traditional meads as a style where the main focus is to really show off honey, I think it's still fair to say that adding these other elements is going to show it off even better. It's going to
agreed. Yeah,
really balance.
Absolutely.
Delicious beverage rather than, you know, just honey and water and you ferment it and blah. It's interesting if we want to push this wine comparison. It's interesting to think. So looking at traditional meads, like if you're looking at a wine comparison, it seems like you're going to be looking at a sweet white wine, or you know, the sweetness might be variable, but it seems like the easiest comparison is to white wine. I'm very new in learning about wines, but from what I've learned, it seems like a lot of times the balance in white wines hinges on acidity versus in red wines, it oftentimes hinges more on tannin. So how do you think that leads into mead? Because it seems like that sweetness being in the mix, you know, do you feel like there's more of a role for acidity than there is tannin, or do you feel like either they're equally important for balance in a mead in general?
I think I think they're equally, well, it varies. Your grapes have tannin in grape skins, so you're going to get some when you press white grapes, you're going to get some tannin. But you're right, there's more acidity probably in white wine and much more tannin in red wine because you're fermenting on the grape skins for red wine, and that's where all that comes from. But I think there's a role for a little bit of tannin. You don't want to necessarily slap someone over the head with an oak stave, and you're adding a layer of complexity, a layer of flavor, just another element, not just honey, not just sweetness. I don't know. So I used to watch a lot of the Food Network and a lot of like chef shows, right? And they would always, particularly the show Chopped, and the judges would always talk about layers of flavor, and it's a pretty obvious comment. And then I went to one of these like famous like Iron Chef restaurants, and I was blown away, literally blown away. And I'm a cook, and I know food a little, but it's like it's just like it's like, yeah, layers, yes, many elements all working together. Structure. That's what makes a mead a good thing. Adding those other elements, so it's not just like, I'm honey, hey, I'm sweet. That's it.
Yeah, it seems like structure is really what allows those layers of flavors to really be experienced instead of being all muddled. You can experience, I mean, if you even want to just go back to the intro to the mead guidelines, I believe, we talked about how these styles are so broad, but in general, what is desirable in a mead? And I think one thing that's listed is a long finish. And it seems like structure is one thing that really facilitates having a nice, long, enjoyable finish on your mead, would you say?
Yeah. When you drink a mead, you should get to the end of that sip of mead and go, oh, wow, I want to taste more of that. And what elements play into that? Acidity is one of them. Tannin helps, add that, round that out, balance it out. Not too much alcohol. I think that's another mistake people make, is going too big. All mead doesn't have to be, 16+% ABV. Back it down a little, make something drinkable that's not going to knock you off your ass or knock you on your ass, and that you can enjoy. What else? Mouthfeel. That's where tannin comes in as well with the mouthfeel. It just rounds it out a little, softens it, broadens it.
Nice. I'd like to talk about pyments. It seems like a style that you've had some experience, some success with. I think you and I actually judged pyments together one time, and I feel like I learned a lot. But I want to address this style because it seems like this and some of these other hybrid styles, so Sizer and Braggot being the other ones, it's hard to really get a good fair judging. There's a lot of things for a judge to nitpick. So can you walk me through what you're looking for when you're judging pyment?
I think you want to pick a good varietal, and then you want to pick a complementary honey, and you want those things to work together and play together. So maybe you pick, I don't know, an obvious one is orange blossom honey, maybe, and you pick a varietal with some acidity, perhaps like Gewürztraminer or Riesling. Those are common ones, and so it gives it, the honey some life, but it shouldn't be too sweet. It shouldn't be too alcoholic. I mentioned those things already, but you want something wine strength, 8 to 10%, maybe 12%. But I think that's where you need to be, and not go way up there and make it too sweet and too boozy. Once you getting sweet and boozy, then it's just not enjoyable.
So if you have a pyment come across your judging table and say, like, particularly with like a dry pyment, how much honey expression do you think is appropriate and are you looking for if you were to judge a dry pyment?
But you want some honey expression, and you can get that. It's a little harder to do when you ferment it out dry, but it doesn't have to be completely dry. There can be some, it can go up, the style guidelines say, say you can go up to 10-10. So there can be some residual sweetness in there, but you have to make sure you balance that out so it doesn't present as too sweet. So again, that's where something like acidity or tannin comes in.
In your mind, does it have to be something where we're trying to hit this balance of, this is a 50% wine, this is a 50% mead? Like, I'm seeing equal expression of grape and honey.
No, not at all. No, no. It could go either way. You know, well, again, you know, it's okay. Okay, there's two things: grapes and honey. Do they have to be totally equal? No. You know, one can be. And how would you do that? You know, it's like, no. Do they work well together? Is
I,
it a cohesive beverage?
yeah, I think so many of these nitpicky situations, that's where we have to just zoom out and just ask how much does it work in general as a beverage,
Right.
and just get away from this nitty gritty. You know, it's, oh, maybe this is 70% this and 30% this. It's like, no, does it work? You know, how harmonious is this? It doesn't necessarily, that balance doesn't necessarily have to hit as even, but it has to be enjoyable, and it shouldn't be harsh. It shouldn't be flabby. It should be a good beverage, right?
Yeah, that's a great word. Harmonious. Yeah. Does it all work? Is it, are you enjoying this? Do you want to drink more of it?
Awesome. I think we should drink some mead. Speaking of,
Sounds like a
so
plan. Yay.
all right, so we are jumping into our taste along portion. So, Steve, I'm going to have you talk to us about what mead we're going to drink here.
Uh, I had this mead in St. Louis last fall when I was judging at the National Honey Board's mead competition. It's a dry, sparkling. Let's see, let me get this. There we go. Woo. Woo-hoo. Oh, I guess I. Okay.
Got a little excited.
And it reminded me of a brut champagne, and I really enjoyed it a lot. So when you suggested we do a tasting, I thought, well, you know, people don't have a lot of familiarity with dry mead, so let's maybe do a dry mead.
And this is a dry sparkling.
Yeah.
Looks like probably standard strength 12.5. That's still in standard, right? And so this is from Heidrun Meadery out of Point Reyes Station, California. I have never had one of their meads, so this should be pretty neat.
And it's Lehua honey, and all of their meads are dry. They do different floral sources, and they're all the traditional champagne methods. So they're carbonated in the bottle.
That's really cool that there's meaderies doing that style. Have you ever played around with that method champenois? I'm going to say it wrong. You ever try that yourself?
No, it sounds way too complicated to do. So I'm getting a lot of, you know, the nose I think is wonderful. It just, you know, beautiful floral Lehua.
Have you had a lot of Lehua before, Fletty?
Not a lot. I have some that I've been meaning to use, but I haven't got around to fermenting it. I've had a few in competition that have just like, and from friends like, whoa, that just like, I need to make something with that honey. That's amazing honey.
Yeah, it seems like there's starting to be, I know that Sean Darrell Harris is selling more Hawaiian varietals. I know there's pretty much otherwise just the one, was it, I always forget, Moonshine Trading, I forget the name. Lots of varietals. I know that's where I got my Lehua when I did it before.
What do you think? What are you smelling?
So a little bit of fruit and spice. It doesn't smell as fruity as other times I've had Lehua, but it smells really elegant.
Yeah, I get a little pineapple.
Yeah, it's definitely in that tropical family. When I've had Lehua before, it seemed like it's been like pineapple, peach, and maybe some cinnamon, but that could have been the yeast for the cinnamon part when I did it before.
To me, it just comes across as a really nice brut champagne. It's crisp, it's lively, dry, but not bitter, but not grating, but not boozy. Just really crisp and lively and just delicious.
It's weird for something to smell crisp because that's usually like a mouthfeel sensation, right? But is it just the carbonic acid? Just
Yeah, probably.
it's definitely dry.
But not harsh,
No,
right?
if you had to guess final gravity on that, just for fun.
Oh boy, it's probably 1.000 or maybe like 0.998. Good question. Yeah. I think it's elegant. It's something you could have for a celebration or brunch. Make mimosas, mead mimosas, and it'd be wonderful for that.
Yeah, and this is not something. It's not like we're talking about 10 different ingredients right here. This is a simple but elegant mead.
Yeah, yeah. I actually emailed the mead maker and asked. He's using some sort of champagne yeast. I can't remember exactly which one. Yeah, just honey and water and champagne yeast. It's simple and beautiful.
So what would be, if somebody was to try to make this style, so if you saw a mead like this come across your judging table, what do you think some potential pitfalls, not that this mead has them, but what do you think somebody could be, missing the mark on? What would be easy to not hit perfectly on a style like this?
First of all, I think you need to use really good honey. And I think a lot of people miss that. They just find whatever honey there's nothing wrong with that, whatever honey they can. But you have to think about how are you going to use that honey? And to make something like this, you have to have a honey that's going to express itself well. Something, a really good monofloral. So that when you ferment it, there's some interesting aromatics there and interesting flavors, and it's just some, if you try to do this with some, and not that wildflower is bad, but just like some whatever basic wildflower, it's probably not going to turn out really well. It just probably, yeah. Whereas this one with the fruity aromatics, it presents really well.
Yeah, that carbonation pushes it out just really beautifully. Like it just really, it is a very fruity nose, and it follows through on the finish. How do you think, in terms of structure, can you walk me through how you're evaluating acidity, tannin, alcohol on this mead? Not in a negative sense, but just where do you think each of those parameters are at? And how do you know? What do you do tasting to sense that?
First of all, it's very lively in the mouth, so you get a lot of that the CO2. So which expresses from the carbonic acid as acidity, but underneath that there's the flavor of the honey, which balances that out. And while it's dry, it might not be completely bone dry. There's some sort of a lush mouth feel to it, so it balances that acidity. And so it starts out really like lively, bubbly in the mouth. You get some of that Lehua honey flavor. You get a round, full mouth feel from the honey as well. And it smells beautiful. And it's like, I want another sip.
Do you imagine with this sort of style that you'd have to add acidity if you were to make something like this, or do you think it's going to hit this balance from the champagne method and the dryness, the sparkling? Do you think those combinations? Because to me it seems moderate to high acidity. Like my mouth waters quite a bit when I'm drinking it.
Yeah,
that's all ingredients.
I'd be totally speculating about acidity. I'm not even sure. Or additional acidity. I don't even know. I'd hate to hazard a guess.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point. We shouldn't necessarily speculate on process, but how do you gauge the tannin on this? Do you think there's how much tannin do you think there is here?
Tannin, I would say very low, if there's any at all. Maybe, yeah. Very low.
I'd say low, maybe a little bit. I get like a little grippy on the roof of my mouth. If you were to, again, if you were to imagine a style like this coming across your judging table, would you assume some flavor contribution from the method, like the champagne method? Because I believe with having that yeast in bottle, don't you get a little bit of a nutty? And I think there is some
Oh, very good point. Very good point. Yes. I think, yeah, you have to use the correct yeast to make this work, I think. And I haven't used champagne yeast much, if at all. So I can't really comment on that, but I'm guessing so, yes.
if you were going to do something like this, I almost feel like you should enter an experimental, because there's going to be certain effects of this process, right?
Probably.
Yeah, I don't think it doesn't seem like you get the same thing, jamming it in a keg and pumping up the pressure on the regulator, right?
Well, you can get that level of carbonation, right? But I think you'd want, maybe you probably want to do, and I don't know a lot about the process, that the traditional champagne process, but I think the correct yeast will give you that. It helps. When I say don't know, what I mean is, like, okay, I do know that champagne yeast, some of those champagne yeasts are really good at giving you that sort of nutty character when you age on the lees, do Sir Lees aging. So I'm thinking that plays some role in here, but again, I don't want to speculate. I don't want to say yes, that's what's happening here, because I just don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. That seems like even with the carbonation, there's a little bit of legs going on in here, which it it could be a function of just the alcohol. I've heard conflicting things on how much leg formation is dependent on other factors other than alcohol and glycerol, whether sweetness does play a role in leg formation or not. But for a dry, crisp sparkling, for me, I'm a little bit surprised at that appearance to see, but maybe it's just the alcohol that's got a little viscosity to it.
Could be.
This is a really interesting example of a well-made, dry, varietal traditional mead. I agree with your comment earlier. The number of dry meads that you've loved, the list is pretty short. I'd say this one probably makes the list.
I think it's fantastic. I honestly do. I've only had this one. He does a lot of other different monofloral varieties. But yeah, it's really nice.
Do you get any other flavor components showing up in the taste, or are you still kind of just in that tropical, like, fruitiness?
Little peach, maybe.
Yeah, it's really nice. I don't know if there's much else to say. It's clean, it's elegant, it hits its bounds pretty well, which it's really, the balance on something like this seems like it's like on the head of a pin. It'd be so easy for it to come off as harsh, too alcoholic, too acidic, too biting. The pitfalls seem like there's plenty.
Yeah, and there's alcohol there, but it's warming alcohol. And some people, I don't think, know the difference between warming and hot. Warming is good, hot is not. And I think that's where some people don't really get out of their comfort zone and haven't had a lot of spirits, perhaps. So they know the difference between, warming versus hot, and higher alcohols versus just like, okay, there's alcohol here and it's warming, versus like, oh, that's just nasty, like nail polish remover sort of, there's a difference. And I've gotten comments from some judges on meads like that, where I made a sack mead and it's like, yeah, it's warming, it is not hot. And they tell me it's hot. I was like, dude, really? Have you ever had any spirits? Do you know what you're talking about? I don't think you do.
Yeah, yeah, that difference, it's not just intensity, right? Like there is a different character between warming and like fusel higher alcohols.
Exactly. And yeah, you need to experience that. You need to know what that is. As a judge, you need to train your palate. And that's not just drinking one thing. It's like get out of your comfort zone, try other things.
It does take a lot of experience. I don't consider myself an expert judge. I'd say I have a moderate amount of experience, but I could see where I could easily mistake harshness for a few different things, right? Is it harsh because there's fusel hot character? Is it harsh because of acidity? Is it harsh because of bitterness? Is it harsh because of astringency? So identifying, okay, there's something here I don't like and it's biting, but what's it from? What's the issue?
And that's going back to the example of writing what you perceive versus telling me what I did. Is like, describe what you perceive. And don't guess, don't make it up. Don't say, okay, it's this because I perceive this. Like, no, just tell me what you perceive, and then the entrant can figure that out.
That's probably a good point. Just as judges, we need to be more honest about our blind spots or even just our inexperience. Like if I'm sensing something in here that doesn't hit me right, that hits me as harsh, and that harsh could be XYZ. It's probably better for me to say something here is harsh than just a guess, right? If I'm unsure, like I'm gonna maybe send that entrant down the wrong rabbit hole if I'm judging, rather than just say, seems harsh, I'm not sure what element that's coming from.
I agree. And I've often written that. It's like, I'm getting this particular character. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but I don't like it. And it's throwing this thing out of balance. That's an exact, it's sort of a general broad example, but I've written that on score sheets numerous times. I'm not going to pretend I know everything. It's just like, no, it's just not possible. No one is like super judge. Some people think they are, but they're not.
Yeah, I agree. Any final comments on this delightful mead?
I believe I'll have some more.
I agree. Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, Fletty. Thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, no problem. Cheers, and thanks for inviting me.